morning, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Liu. I understand that we're hearing from you first on behalf of D1473. Thank you.
D1473's witness statement to the inquiry is dated 26th of January 2022, and it's at BHM 000039. There's a reading and summary as well. I was detained in Brickhouse from 19th of August to 29th of September 2017 for a total of 41 days. It says it's on. Okay, can you?
It is rather quiet.
Okay. Should I move it closer? Is that better? Is that better? Is that better?
Let me ask her.
No, they're getting a message to say that it's not coming up loud enough for the stenographer, yeah. Sorry, Miss Lee, if you
That's okay,
just
don't
give us
worry.
1 moment and just double check
That's
that she
totally
can hear
fine.
us. Yeah.
She's saying Miss Lou's microphone is not transmitting at all.
I'm not speaking right now. So, I am now speaking. Clearly, sorry.
She can hear the chair, but not.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We've just replaced the microphone, changed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say something now.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. 1, 2, 3.
No, still not working.
Okay, let's just pause momentarily and see if we can sort that out.
I'll get next door and ask the sound guys if they can
Okay.
do something.
Thank you.
Because I can see your lights on.
Yeah. And it's a second one, so.
The first one wasn't working, but that one is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can you try it again?
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Should I?
That's fine now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's very loud now.
Great.
We can hear you. Thank you very much. Please carry on.
If I can just start again. D1473's witness statement to the inquiry is dated 26th of January 2022. It's at BHM 000039. I was detained in Brickhouse from the 19th of August to 29th of September 2017 for a total of 41 days. The experience of detention was very difficult for me, especially my time at Brickhouse. I still find it painful to try and remember some aspects. I suffer from mental health symptoms related to my past history of trauma, which was made worse by detention. Since being released from detention, I've been diagnosed with moderate PTSD. I have some problems remembering certain events that happened and when. I can also sometimes become too distressed to continue to speak or reflect on my experiences in detention. I am still taking medication for my PTSD and depression symptoms. I'm receiving calls every couple of weeks from a secondary mental health care team in the community who ask me how I am. I was having counselling, but this stopped during the pandemic. I'm hoping it will restart. My background. D1473 is a Nigerian national and suffered serious violence there. He explains his immigration history in the UK, his conviction, and his first period of immigration detention at the Verne IRC from the 22nd of August 2014 to the 24th of February 2015, during which his mental health started to deteriorate. He struggled to be separated from his partner and his British daughter. Although he initially succeeded in his appeal against deportation and asylum refusal, this outcome was subsequently overturned. My second period of detention. D1473 was redetained on the 13th of July 2017. He was at first held at the Verne IRC before transferring to Brickhouse. At the Verne, he became mentally unwell, was on ACDT, and was given antidepressants and received very limited mental health support, was not seen by a psychiatrist despite reassurances that he would be. He attempted suicide by using a belt around his neck. He was put in segregation as a result. An ACDT had been previously opened because of ongoing thoughts of self-harm and suicide, HOM 029928_0012. He was placed back on ACDT after his attempted suicide. On the 14th of August 2017, D1473 saw a doctor for an assessment and report on his mistreatment in Nigeria. This was a month after he'd been detained. This led to a Rule 35.3 report in which the GP expressed concerns that D1473 may be a victim of torture and suffered symptoms of depression and trauma which worsened in detention due to provoking factors such as hearing the keys, sounds of doors, and transport in van. The Home Office accepted the Rule 35.3 report showed that D1473 was an adult at risk level 3. However, detention was maintained because the Home Office considered D1473 could be removed within 2 to 3 weeks. D1473 said this was not in accordance with the Home Office policy. On the 16th of August 2017, my solicitors Thompson & Co. confirmed to me that they had sent fresh representations to the Home Office about my family life in the UK, including my new partner and baby. D1473 understood this meant he could not be removed until those representations were determined, but detention was nevertheless maintained. D1473 transferred to Brickhouse on the 19th of August 2017, which he recalls was with little notice. My detention at Brickhouse. I arrived at Brickhouse late at night. I felt really tired and confused as to where I was. I remember being seen by a nurse at some point in the early hours of the morning. This appointment took place at around 12:30 a.m. on the 20th of August 2017. HOM 029928_0014. The nurse asked me some general questions about my health and history. I do not remember what was discussed at this appointment. However, I have now seen the nurse's entry in the records, which state I was on ACDT and had a depressive disorder and appeared mentally low in mood. HOM 029928_0014. There is no record of me being asked about my history of torture or Rule 35 report. The following is a summary of paragraphs 28 to 29. D1473 explains that he did not have an induction at Brickhouse and was taken straight to E-Wing. He was placed on constant watch, having arrived at Brickhouse on an open ACDT. He notes that this was notified to the Home Office via IS91RA, Part C, HOM 025617_0008. I found being in Brickhouse to be a real shock. Its setup and operation was much more like an ordinary prison than the Verne. At the Verne, although we were in cells, the cells were not locked, and you had a key to your own cell. The landing was locked at night, but you could still leave your cell to go to the toilet. The Verne was still detention and made me feel really depressed, as explained earlier. However, compared to Brickhouse, it did not feel nearly as oppressive. E-Wing was next to what was called the Block, that is CSU, which was used to segregate detainees. My understanding of what E-Wing was for developed during my time at Brickhouse. I came to understand that it was for people like me who were being monitored because of a risk of self-harm. It was also where they put people who were obviously very seriously mentally unwell. People were also put in E-Wing when they were coming down from Spice or if they were generally behaving badly. Some of the people there were very ill and did not make any sense when you spoke to them. When they spoke. I could not understand why people who were so ill were being detained there. Records note that observations about D1473 were reduced to every 3 hours after several days. D1473 does not recall officers or healthcare staff regularly speaking to him or asking how he was on E-Wing. I found my time in E-Wing really difficult. When I first arrived, I felt like I was just being monitored and watched on self-harm measures and that no one actually cared about me. I felt trapped on the wing. We were locked in overnight from about 8 p.m. to the morning and could only go out onto the E-wing during the day, although we were locked in for an hour or so for roll count. I found being locked in the room very stressful and scary. Every time the door locked behind, I felt really claustrophobic, and I could not escape my bad thoughts and memories of my past mistreatment. I started to feel less like myself, less like a human at all. I started to have bad dreams and more intrusive thoughts about what had happened to me in Nigeria. Both of my rooms in E-wing were small, with an unscreened toilet in them, and because the staff could look through the observation panel in the door, it felt like I had no privacy and added to my feeling of claustrophobia. I felt increasingly depressed and anxious about my situation whilst at Brickhouse. The medical records indicate that on the 20th of August 2017, I declined to see a mental health nurse and I did not attend a GP appointment. I don't understand these entries, as I had agreed to see a mental health nurse on that day, and don't think I would have refused further support. The entry also refers to my attendance at an ACDT review that day. I note it states that, quote, "He becomes very afraid whenever he is behind locked doors," close quotes. "He does not want to be there." HOM 029928_0018. I remember trying to explain to staff about how unwell I felt on E-wing. However, nothing was done in response. I was not, in fact, reviewed by a member of the mental health team until a week into my detention at Brickhouse. From the medical records I have now seen, it does not appear that I had my first GP appointment until the 24th of August 2017, after my attempted removal. The following is a summary of paragraphs 36 to 40. D1473 describes requesting to move from E-wing, but this was refused at first. He was eventually moved from the E-wing to B-wing on the 25th of August 2017, after his unlawful attempted removal. He was in a room alone due to his mental health. D1473 describes that there were very few things to do at Brickhouse and no organized activities. Whilst he could speak English, he saw other detainees struggling to communicate or understand what was happening. I thought the atmosphere in Brickhouse was oppressive. It did not seem that the officers cared about the detainees. I remember one incident on B-wing at the servery when someone complained about the food, and a woman working there said, "If you want to stay in this country, you have to take what you're given." I heard another officer who said he used to be in the military tell a detainee, "I used to kill people like you for fun." I took that to mean he was talking about killing black people, as the man the officer was addressing this comment to was African. This kind of attitude and language was common. Officers would even say that they didn't care when you asked them for help. I tried to keep to myself and keep out of harm's way. I felt like staff at Brickhouse wanted deliberately to put you down, to kill your spirit, because then you feel less of yourself, less human, and you're less likely to speak up or resist. When I was at the Verne, there was a board that had information about how to complain and useful numbers on it. However, at Brickhouse, there didn't seem to be any information about how to complain. I didn't see there was any complaints procedure I could use. I would verbally complain to staff. For example, I complained to a nurse about my treatment when the Home Office tried to remove me, but they didn't take that forward or suggest how I could do that myself. I think the atmosphere in Brickhouse was so oppressive that people didn't feel they had the power to complain anyway and were scared to do so. The following is a summary of paragraphs 44 to 47. D1473 explains that he didn't see a member of IMB at Brickhouse, but regularly did at the Verne. He says that there was no explanation of what support groups were available. D1473 explains that on one occasion, an officer recorded he'd already eaten when he hadn't, so he didn't get a meal. No action was taken against that officer, despite him being told that the officer would be disciplined. This made him feel hopeless. He describes receiving only limited mental health care, comprising intermittent support sessions with a nurse. I felt that healthcare at Brickhouse was really on the side of the detention center, rather than being focused on looking after vulnerable detainees such as myself. Healthcare never sent a Rule 35 report to the Home Office about my situation, despite knowing that I'm a victim of torture and was suffering from serious mental health problems. HOM 029928_0021. There were a lot of drugs in Brickhouse. They were much more available than in the Verne. The drug most commonly used was spice. You would see people quite often in a very bad way, hallucinating and screaming or banging their heads. Occasionally, When someone overdosed on spice, they would disappear, and we would never see them again. I took spice a couple times in Brickhouse. I was given it by people in the exercise yard. I did this just to try and make myself feel better, as my time at Brickhouse was so difficult. However, it didn't help, and I didn't use spice again, nor did I try any other drugs after these times. I think there were multiple ways to get spice or other drugs into Brickhouse. I understood that people on the outside would fly the drugs into the outside area using a drone or toy helicopter. I also heard rumors that staff would facilitate detainees getting drugs by taking drugs from visitors who would bring it into Brickhouse, and then the officer would pass the drugs onto the detainee. I didn't report drug use to staff because it was so obvious that staff knew. When someone was being really disruptive on drugs, staff would call healthcare. But when people were calm but clearly high or stoned, staff would just walk past and ignore them. I remember someone seizing, and staff telling detainees to leave them as it was a drugs reaction, and assumed staff knew that it would pass. As far as I was aware, there wasn't any rehabilitative programs or support for drug users at Brickhouse. The unlawful attempt to remove me on the 23rd and 24th of August 2017. Although I had been given some documents saying I could be removed from the UK, I hadn't been given a specific date and didn't think this could happen until my representations had been dealt with. I was told by staff at Brickhouse they contacted the Home Office and they had received my outstanding representations. I was not worried, as I wouldn't be removed. It was therefore a shocking and terrifying experience for me when the Home Office tried to remove me to Nigeria. The inquiry already has a full statement of D1473's experiences dated 20th of November 2017. I think it is important, though, to set out the key features of what happened to me here, but I hope that whatever I don't mention here is not taken as not being important or affecting me in particular. I have been asked various questions by the inquiry about this attempted removal and use of force, but I still haven't received its disclosure of the CCTV footage of the removal. I have been asking for that footage since 2017, when I made my complaint to the Home Office, but still haven't seen it. I had been aware that day from other people on Brickhouse that there was going to be a charter flight to Nigeria on the 23rd of August 2017. But because of what I was told by my solicitors and the manager at Brickhouse, I was therefore not worried about being affected by this charter flight. Throughout the day on the 23rd of August, people were told that they would be on the charter flight and people were being moved around as a result. No one came to speak to me about this, which made me feel more assured. Then, in the early evening, around 6:10 p.m., a manager at Brickhouse came and told me that I would be on the flight. I explained I shouldn't be on the flight because the Home Office had yet to consider my further representations for leave to remain. The manager told me to go get a copy of the application form from my room and then speak to the Home Office officials in reception. I was shocked and frightened about what was going to happen to me. I remember that an officer then escorted me to my room in E-Wing to collect my papers. I returned to reception to wait to speak to the Home Office officials. Whilst I was waiting, I noticed that several bags had been put behind me containing my belongings. This happened so quickly, and I was upset and embarrassed that someone had packed my personal things without my knowledge. I didn't know who to trust. I knew that my immigration solicitors wouldn't be able to help me because their offices were closed. I just carried on waiting to speak to a Home Office official to explain again that I should not be removed. I never got the chance to do that. The next thing that happened was 2 officers came to find me. They seemed to be security guards of some kind, though I now know they were task or escort officers contracted by the Home Office. I told them I was waiting to see a Home Office official and that I shouldn't be put on a plane that evening to Nigeria. They didn't listen and just gave me instructions on signing some forms. I complied, I didn't resist, even though I didn't want to be removed and didn't think it was right that I was being forcibly removed when the Home Office had yet to make a decision on my representations. Despite this, I was put in a waist restraint belt by the 2 officers. This was both painful and humiliating. Both my hands were tied in front of me to the belt, so I could barely lift my arms. I kept telling the officers that the belt was too tight, but they didn't seem to be listening to me. I continued to complain about the stomach pain and discomfort it was causing me throughout the journey to the airport, but no one listened to me or made any effort to loosen the belt. I was kept in a waist restraint belt for a total of 5.5 hours and didn't ever resist. Being held in that belt for so long made me recall my traumatic experiences in detention in Nigeria. I understand from the documents that Taskor disclosed in my litigation against them that they say the waist restraint belt was used because I had a history of being disruptive and was on ACDT. I understand that this information had come, at least in part, from the Home Office. However, this is just not correct. I wasn't resisting at all. They weren't listening to me, and I couldn't access a Home Office official either in the detention centre or on arrival at the airport. Moreover, I can't see how my being on self-harm measures should have resulted in me being put in this kind of restraint. I'm summarising paragraphs 61 to 62. On the way to the military base where the flight was going, D1473 says he kept trying to explain he shouldn't be removed. The officers didn't respond. The waist restraint belt was very tight around his stomach and caused him a lot of pain. At the military base, he suffered further humiliation as 2 officers watched him whilst he went to the toilet with the waist restraint belt still on him. He was returned to Brickhouse in the early hours of the morning after it was confirmed that he had outstanding representations. The waist restraint belt was removed for the journey back. He was told this was because the risk had gone down. I found the experience of that night terrifying and humiliating from start to finish. I was treated like an animal you were transporting. I had no experience like this before. I couldn't believe this was happening to me. The whole experience lasted about 10.5 hours. The terror of facing removal to Nigeria, of being ignored when I tried to explain I had an application preventing this, and being placed in prolonged restraint throughout was indescribable. I still find it difficult to think about the experience, and it makes me feel very uneasy remembering it. I'm often having nightmares about it, waking up sweating so much that my bed sheets are wet. The remainder of my experience at Brickhouse. The following is a summary of paragraphs 65 to 67. D1473 saw a nurse after returning to Brickhouse on the 24th of August 2017, HOM 029928_0019. He told the nurse of pains to his stomach and shoulder caused by the waist restraint belt. The abdominal pains continued for several days. He was not seen by a GP until the 5th of September 2017. The stomach pains eventually resolved, but his shoulders are still very sore from time to time. He also asked to see a psychiatrist as he felt mentally unwell. A medical record dated 26th of August 2017, HOM 020028, noted that D1473 was traumatized by his unlawful removal and that it brought back memories of flashbacks of previous mistreatment in Nigeria. He was noted to be hearing voices. He started to feel paranoid. No Rule 35 report was raised. Instead, D1473 was downgraded from adult at risk level 3 to level 2 by the Home Office after a detention review on the 7th of September 2017, HOM 024617. He understands that this was owing to healthcare telling the Home Office that D1473's mental health was being managed well and that detention didn't appear to be making his health worse. I don't understand why healthcare would have said that, as it clearly wasn't true. The doctor had said the opposite of that in my Rule 35.3 report. I would have thought I would need to be assessed by a psychiatrist before I could be downgraded in this way. It doesn't make sense to me that it could be suggested I was improving, especially when I was feeling even worse after the failed removal and had told healthcare that I felt traumatized, I was having flashbacks and hearing voices. The summary of paragraphs 69 to 70. D1473 describes how Taskor escorts refused to take him to a bail hearing on the 18th of September 2017 because he was on ACDT, HOM 025617_0007. He couldn't understand this given his recent attempted removal whilst on ACDT. He stopped eating for a few days. The Home Office refused his fresh claim and set a removal window, which was only deferred following a judicial review. He described further thoughts of self-harm at this time. The day before I was released on bail on 28th of September 2017, the IRC staff tried to make me share a room with someone I didn't know, and I was segregated for refusing to do this. At this point, I was feeling desperate and couldn't face sharing a cell on B Wing. I understand from my solicitors that detainees should only be segregated in what I would call the block at the end of E-wing on grounds of security or safety under Rule 40 of the Detention Centre rules. I don't know why it was necessary to do this to me. Being segregated made me feel vulnerable and scared again. This was the only time I was in segregation in Brickhouse. Complaints. I did ask the Home Office through my solicitors to investigate a complaint about my treatment when I was taken from Brickhouse for removal by the escort on the 23rd and 24th of August. I also made a complaint about the fact that the Home Office had tried to remove me. At first, I understand that the Home Office referred the complaint about my restraint back to Taskor to deal with internally. I have seen email correspondence between Taskor and the Home Office, CAP 000539, confirming that the Home Office's initial view was that my complaint was unlikely to constitute serious or gross misconduct. It was minor. I think this shows that they didn't take the complaint seriously. I don't think being wrongly restrained for 5.5 hours was a minor matter. My solicitors made representations that the Home Office should investigate this complaint, which was accepted. But both complaints were rejected. I was disappointed because they didn't seem to deal with my complaints properly. The complaint response in relation to the restraints stated that there was CCTV from inside the vehicle which took me to the airport. My solicitors asked for a copy of the CCTV, but it was never disclosed. The response to the complaint on restraint didn't seem to recognize that the use of a body belt when I had mental health problems was a serious issue. The Home Office claimed it was reasonable for me to be restrained by the body belt for 5.5 hours, even though I was compliant. The response to the complaint about being unlawfully removed stated that I would not have been removed without the representations being dealt with. I didn't understand this. Why was I taken to the airport under forced restraint and only released from them at early in the morning then? I think the Home Office can't properly investigate its own staff or Taskor because they work together. They don't want to own up when something like this happens because it's good business to work together and they don't want problems. But if the Home Office doesn't deal with these types of complaints properly, they will never learn from their mistakes and detainees will continue to be treated badly. The Home Office didn't even think about whether if they did refuse my representations, I should be able to get legal advice and challenge the decision before I was removed. My solicitors have advised me that this is an important right I had. In the end, the Home Office did refuse my representations, but they accepted I should have another right of appeal. This would not have happened if I had been forcibly removed as they planned. D1473 describes that his complaint was referred to Sussex Police, but they didn't investigate. D1473 describes how Bat Murphy brought civil claims against the Home Office for unlawful detention and Taskor for the use of force, both of which settled for compensation without an admission of liability or apology. I'm not aware that any steps have been taken by the Home Office or Taskor to hold any of their staff responsible for these actions and the harm caused to me. That is one of the reasons I am participating in this inquiry. Paying me compensation without acknowledging that they did wrong is not enough. I don't see how things will change if nobody is held to account for their decisions and actions. They just seem to get away with it. I'm also frustrated that my complaints were just dismissed. I was made to feel again like they didn't listen, didn't care about what had happened to me. Feeling worthless is one of the worst feelings you can have. It still really affects me. D1473 has provided a signed statement of truth.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. I understand that we're now hearing from you on behalf of D2158 as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
D2158's witness statement to the inquiry is dated 13th of January 2022. It's at BHM 000029. I was detained at Brickhouse over 4 years ago, between 10th of April and 15th of May 2017, for a total of 35 days. I found my time there difficult and distressing, and for a long time I tried to forget what had happened to me there in order to cope with it. I've asked my barrister to read my statement on my behalf for this reason. My background. D2158 was born in Iran. He's a victim of child sexual abuse. In 2016, he had to flee Iran because he had been detained and tortured by police after he converted to Christianity. He was also violently attacked and stabbed in the street for wearing a cross, sustaining serious injuries. He arrived in the UK in September 2016 after passing through several European countries, including Germany. He made his asylum claim on arrival, was interviewed briefly, and then was granted temporary admission by the Home Office. In November 2016, D2158 received a letter from the Home Office informing him of its intention to request Germany to take responsibility for his asylum claim under the Dublin III regulations. D2158 didn't understand what the letter meant. In February 2017, D2158 was asked to report to the Home Office every 2 weeks. He did this regularly until he was detained on the 10th of April 2017 when he reported to the Home Office. He was handcuffed and taken to Brickhouse IRC with several other men that day. This was late in the night. My detention at Brickhouse. At first, I didn't know what the place was, but when I saw the layout of the centre, the doors which were like those of a prison, and that there were people of different nationalities there, I realised that I must have been taken to a detention centre. I still didn't know where I was, what was happening, or why I had been taken there. By the time we arrived at Brickhouse, it was dark and late. I wanted to say to the officers, please do not send me back. But my English was very limited, so I think all I managed to say was, no back. I was then seen by a person who I now know as a healthcare assistant. I was tired, disorientated, and confused when the appointment with the healthcare assistant started. I didn't understand many of the questions that I was being asked because there was no interpreter at the appointment. I only had enough knowledge of English to understand a few things like the healthcare assistant said. Even on the questions I understood, I didn't feel I was able to give proper answers because there was no interpreter, and I didn't feel I could explain myself. I do remember being asked whether I had been tortured, and I said yes, I had been tortured in Iran. An IS 91RA Part A risk factor sheet, HOM 014697, dated 10th of April 2017, recorded that D2158 had had a stomach operation in Iran after being stabbed. He continued to suffer stomach pains at the time. D2158 had not been able to see a doctor or receive medication for his pain since arriving in the UK. The conditions at Brickhouse and the deterioration in my health. After the appointment with the healthcare assistant, I was led to another room. I was initially placed on what I believe was the induction wing, B wing. I was locked into the cell. I would soon find out that every day in the evening, we were locked in the cell by officers and remained locked in until about 9 a.m. the following morning. I found this really hard to cope with. Often I felt claustrophobic, but I felt there was nothing I could do once I was locked in, that I couldn't ask for help. I was afraid something worse would happen to me if I asked to be let out, because more than once I heard officers take other detainees out of their cells and the detainees sounding like they were in distress. I was in my cell on my own for 1 or 2 nights. Then another detainee was put in the cell to share it with me. The cell was small and the toilet was inside it. There were 2 walls on either side of the toilet, but there was a gap between them and no door to close the gap. So if I was in the cell, even sitting or lying on the bed, and the person I shared the cell with was on the toilet, I could see him, or vice versa. It was just humiliating for both of us. I still find it very difficult to think about the cells I lived at Brickhouse. The conditions generally at Brickhouse were unhygienic and unsanitary. The shower rooms in particular were always dirty. I remember that I once went into the showers, and soon after I turned on the water, what looked like dirty toilet water started coming out of the shower drain. It was awful and smelled badly. I also started having palpitations at night. I had suffered from these before, but in detention they became worse. Often at night, I also felt like someone was putting their hands around my throat, and I struggled to breathe. I started having nightmares, but while I was not fully asleep. They were very vivid. I had never felt like that before, and it frightened me. I couldn't stop them from happening. I also started suffering from headaches almost every day. On 17th of April 2017, I complained to a nurse that I was having palpitations and tried to explain that I felt like someone was putting their hands around my throat. There was no interpreter available, so I had to ask another Iranian detainee who spoke better English than me to attend with me so that he could help me communicate with the nurse. I had my first appointment with the doctor at Brickhouse after more than 2 weeks there. My solicitors have told me that I should have seen a doctor within 24 hours of being at Brickhouse. I didn't know this. No one told me anything about what I should expect in detention or what rights I had. The healthcare records say that the doctor was called Dr. Uzirali. I do not feel like the doctor examined me in detail at the appointment, and I struggled to explain myself because there was no interpreter in the room. There was someone who spoke Farsi on the phone who assisted with the appointment, but I found it difficult to properly communicate with the doctor through the interpreter on the telephone. I'm not sure whether the interpreter was a native Farsi speaker, but they didn't sound fluent, and I struggled to understand them and felt that they struggled to understand me. The doctor asked me questions about what happened to me in the past. I tried to explain that I had been detained by the police in Iran, that I had been tortured during the time. I explained that the officers had tied me to a chair, handcuffed me, put a cloth soaked in oil in my mouth and broken my nails. I also told the doctor that I had been stabbed with a knife in a separate attack in Iran and told him about my scars and the surgery I had had after being stabbed. I remember the doctor saw the scars on my abdomen. This was the first time I told anyone about what happened to me in Iran since I had fled. It was difficult to talk about it, especially through an interpreter who I felt didn't understand me and who I couldn't see. It was made even harder because I also didn't know why I was being asked questions about it, and I felt the doctor wasn't really listening to me or didn't care. I felt as if he didn't really see me. The purpose of the appointment with the doctor wasn't explained to me. I didn't understand at the time what he would do with the information I was providing. I didn't know what a Rule 35 report was. D2158 has not seen a copy of the Rule 35 report. It has not been disclosed by the Home Office to solicitors or the inquiry. An entry in the medical records summarised the report and the Home Office's response, HOM 014757. The entry in my medical records say, no scars declared or observed, but later records, small scars on the abdomen noted on the left side. I'm confused by this, as it appears to be clearly contradictory. I also find the Home Office's response to the report confusing, as it first says that the doctor has noted that you have small scars on the left side of the abdomen, but then says, in their final assessment, the doctor has noted that whilst you have visibly poor dentition, you have no other scars or mental health issues which explicitly suggest torture. Moreover, I know now that the entry in the medical records state that I was suffering from palpitations at night, and the Home Office's response says that according to the doctor, this suggests that I suffered from anxiety. Again, confusingly, however, the entry in the medical records state that I had never had any mental health issues. The doctor didn't ask me about my mental health. Having reviewed the records and the Home Office's response, I do not feel that I was listened to or assessed properly. The day after my appointment with Dr. Uzirali, a nurse told me I had to sign something. I tried to explain I couldn't sign because I didn't understand what the form they were asking me to sign said. I didn't sign the form. I still don't know what it was that I was asked to sign. I was never given a copy of it. There were rarely interpreters available at Brickhouse, and I remember other Iranian detainees also struggled to understand what was being said to them and communicated with staff. Throughout my detention, I continued to feel really anxious and have palpitations, especially at night. I went to healthcare several times to ask for help because of this, but more than once I was told no doctor could see me. I also had really severe toothache and bleeding from my gums whilst I was at Brickhouse and reported this to healthcare several times since my first week in detention. But I was just given some painkillers and wasn't seen by a dentist for several weeks. The pain and bleeding made it difficult for me to eat or drink properly. It also made it hard for me to sleep, and I felt anxious. After I finally saw the dentist, I was given antibiotics. I felt frustrated by this, that no one cared. I felt as though the healthcare professionals at Brickhouse were not treating the medical issues I raised seriously. Violence and mistreatment by staff at Brickhouse. After I moved from B to C wing, things became much worse. I was already very anxious. In the new wing, I and other detainees were treated badly and often bullied by the officers. I felt like the officers at Brickhouse, particularly the ones in C wing, often treated us more like animals than human beings. I remember 2 episodes when officers kicked me completely without justification. D2158 understands that the inquiry will want to know the names of the officers who mistreated him or mistreated others, but this is difficult because the officers didn't normally introduce themselves to the detainees or tell them their names. The first time I was in the corridor with other detainees and we were about to go into our cells for the night lockup. I was entering my cell on my own because my cellmate wasn't there when an officer approached me from behind. At first, I didn't think anything of it because I knew he was there to lock my room. However, he then kicked me in the bottom of my feet, one of my feet, pushing me further into the cell. I was shocked when the officer kicked me. I didn't expect it, and I stumbled forward. I was wearing flip-flops, and he was wearing boots, so it hurt the sole of my foot. The officer said something in a low voice, which I couldn't understand. He then left and locked the door to my cell. I don't know the officer's name. He was white, of medium or large build, and had short hair. He looked like he was in his mid-30s at the time. I felt too scared to react when I was kicked, so I didn't say anything at that time. In fact, I was scared all the time of what the officers could do to me. I had previously, not on the same day, heard other detainees screaming when my cell door was locked at night, and it sounded like they were being physically assaulted by officers. I couldn't see them, but they sounded like they were in pain. I was scared something like that would happen to me, so I never put a complaint in about this incident. I also didn't know about the complaint system in the center, nor of any organizations that I could speak to about complaints. No one ever told me a complaint system existed or how to access it. The second time an officer kicked me, I was coming back to C Wing from the outdoor yard. I was going through the first door which led to the corridor. There was then a second door at the end of the corridor through which you access the main building. There was an officer standing near the first door, and when I entered, he just kicked the back of my knees with his boots. The kick hurt, especially because he was wearing boots, and I stumbled forward. The officer also said something to me which I didn't understand. There were no other detainees or members of staff present at that time. When I went back to my cell, I saw that my trousers had been stamped with dirt from his boot. It was just humiliating. I don't know why he did that. I didn't know the officer, hadn't spoken to him before, so far as I can remember, and I hadn't said anything to him when I was in the outdoor yard. I didn't understand what reason he would have to treat me like that. I don't know the officer's name, but I remember he had short hair and was wearing a dark navy shirt with G4S logo on it. It wasn't the same officer who kicked me in the first incident that I mentioned. There were also other ways in which officers mistreated us. For example, I once accidentally dropped a plastic spoon I had been given with my meal in the bin by mistake and had no cutlery to eat as a result. I tried to ask an officer for a spoon and a fork to eat and explained that I had dropped my spoon in the bin by accident. The officer shook his head at me and said no. The officer didn't give me any cutlery and gestured to one of the bins. An Iranian detainee translated the officer's response for me, which was that I would just have to take the spoon out of the bin and use it, wash it and use it. I was eventually able to get a clean fork from another detainee, but it felt humiliating and unnecessary. I don't remember having any dealings with this officer in the past. I don't know why it would have been a problem to give me a clean fork or spoon. It felt like he was just trying to make me feel like I was not a human being. After I was moved to C Wing, I also witnessed people self-harming and getting no proper help. It was horrible. I find remembering these events particularly difficult. On one occasion, I was coming back from the outdoor yard with other detainees, and I heard people shouting that a man had cut himself. I went towards the place where I thought the shouting was coming from. There were several detainees crowding at the door of the cell of another Iranian detainee. I can't remember his name, but I remember he was from southern Iran. He was young, he couldn't speak English. I entered the cell and saw that he had blood on one of his wrists and his hand. He had cut himself with a razor. I started talking to him in Farsi, just trying to reassure him that he would be okay. There were other people watching from the doorway. Not long after I entered, a G4S officer entered. He just grabbed me and pushed me out of the cell. He said something I couldn't understand. This officer was white male, large build. I recall him having very big feet and a shaved head. He appeared in his 40s. As I was pushed out of the cell, I saw that there was another officer present just outside the room near the door. I didn't sustain any injuries as a result of the push, but I was shocked that the officer had grabbed me and forced me out of the cell when I was just trying to help the other detainee. I have been asked whether I was given any form to fill out after this incident happened. I didn't know that there was a procedure whereby I may be asked to give my account of what I saw. I was not given any form to fill out. I don't know what happened to the young man in the cell after the incident, but I know that when I left Brickhouse, he was still detained there. I also witnessed a second incident where someone cut his wrist with a razor while we were in the area where we normally ate. I didn't know that detainee. It was horrible. There was blood everywhere. I was not closely involved, but I saw it. Officers came and took him away from the area. There is a third incident that I witnessed through my time in Brickhouse. I was watching television in the indoor recreation area when suddenly I heard a loud noise. It sounded like people shouting. I went towards where the noise was coming from in the eating area opposite where I was, and there was already other detainees gathered around the table where we normally ate. We were on the ground floor of the building, and the noise was coming from the floor above us. You could see the landing of that floor if you stood on top of the table at the central area was open, and there was no ceiling there dividing it from the floor above. When I got onto the table, I saw that on the floor above us, there was a detainee who had wrapped what I believe was the wire of an electric shaver around his neck and was trying to either strangle or hang himself with it. He was standing in the doorway of a cell. I'm not sure whether his feet were fully on the floor. I didn't know the detainee, but I remember he was a black man. I couldn't see well from where I was standing where the wire went, but I believe he had tried to tie it to the door frame. I could see the wire wrapped around his neck. There was another detainee shouting and calling for help. The man with the wire around his neck looked like he was suffocating. It was distressing to watch. 2 officers arrived and took him away. I don't remember healthcare ever arriving. I do not know what happened to him. The attempt to remove me and my decision to refuse food. On 9th of May 2017, the Home Office sought to remove D2158 to Germany. He wasn't told in advance and he didn't know what was going on. He refused to go by shaking his head. He was very scared. The removal was later cancelled. After that day, I felt even more scared and anxious that I would be removed, and I stopped eating. I did this because I was struggling to cope with detention and felt I needed something to happen. I couldn't take it anymore. I can't remember how many days I went without eating, but I think it was 3 to 4 days. I was checked by healthcare during this time, but their checks just consisted of asking me whether I had eaten, and I think ticking a box when I said I hadn't. It looked like they did this on a form, but I was never given a copy of it. I don't believe they took any observations. I remember once during this period, a male member of staff asked me why I was not eating or drinking, and I just said no and shook my head. He didn't ask me any further questions. There were no interpreters present during this exchange or any other checks from officers about my food or drink refusal. On the 12th of May 2017, I had an appointment with a nurse. I struggled to remember exactly what happened at the appointment as I was going through a very difficult time. I was not eating and I felt weak. I remember I just had my head down and didn't want to speak. I remember saying I wanted to leave Brickhouse. I felt depressed and just didn't want to be there. The woman who could speak Farsi asked me to try and speak to them as they may be able to help me. I did speak to them for some time, although I don't remember what was discussed exactly. However, after a while, I felt trapped and claustrophobic in the room, like I was in a cage and asked to leave, and they allowed me to do so. My release from Brickhouse and the impact on me. I was released from Brickhouse on the 15th of May 2017. My solicitor has told me that my release was in fact authorised on the 11th of May 2017. I don't know why I was not told that my release had been authorised and the reasons for this. I have now been told by my solicitor that the decision was made because I couldn't be removed to Germany. I find it difficult to understand why the Home Office didn't tell me this and left me without any knowledge that I would be released, especially when it was such a distressing time for me. I find talking about my detention at Brickhouse really difficult, and thinking about what happened to me there makes me anxious. Since being released, I have struggled to sleep properly. I've had nightmares and flashbacks to my treatment in Iran, and to my time at Brickhouse and the things I witnessed there. I also still suffer from heart palpitations. In December 2017, my GP diagnosed me with PTSD. I was also more recently, in June 2021, assessed by a psychiatrist, Dr. Paula Murphy, who prepared a report for me and diagnosed me with PTSD and said in her opinion, this was made worse by my detention at Brickhouse. D2158 has provided a statement of truth. He confirms that the statement has been translated and read to him in Farsi by a professional interpreter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. And I'd like to thank your clients D1473 and D2158 for providing that information to the inquiry. I'm going to ask that we take a short 5-minute comfort break before we then hear from you, Mr. Lee. Thank you very much.
All rise.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lee, I understand we're hearing from your client, from you on behalf of your client, D313.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
D313 in fact attends. He sits in the public gallery but would prefer me to read and summarise his statement.
Indeed, thank you.
His statement is dated the 21st of February 2022 and has been given the reference DL 0000233, and in common with the other witnesses there is both a witness statement and a summary note, Chair, which I hope you have.
I do, thank you.
The first 17 paragraphs can be summarised as follows. D313 explains that he is a national of Morocco and that he was detained at Brickhouse between the 30th of May 2017 and the 28th of June 2017 when he was released on bail. It was not his first time in immigration detention, nor his last. However, in June 2021, he was granted 30 months leave to remain after his appeal against the decision to revoke his deportation order was allowed on an Article 3 basis. He explains that he has suffered from a drug addiction for some years, which has resulted in him spending time in prison. D313 stopped using drugs when he was released from immigration detention in 2019. He is now drug-free and his life has completely changed for the better. D313 has not been detained nor had any legal issues since, which allows him to take care of his elderly mother and unwell brother. When his appeal was allowed, the immigration judge complimented his hard work. D313 also explains that he has suffered from mental ill health for many years, which he still struggles to cope with. He has been diagnosed as suffering from severe depression and anxiety. He has self-harmed for a number of years, including whilst in detention. D313 explains that whilst detained at Harmondsworth, IRC, Dr. Lisa Wooten diagnosed him with a learning difficulty, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and conduct disorder, a personality disorder, a mood disorder, and substance dependence. Dr. Wooten also stated in her report that detention was likely to increase D313's stress levels and have a negative effect on his mental health, which led to an increased risk of self-harm and suicide in detention. She noted that D313 was likely to continue to self-harm and that he had a number of risk factors for completed suicide. Dr. Wooten also noted D313's achievements, as the immigration judge had, when she further assessed him and prepared another report in 2020. At that time, she considered the risk of self-harm to be moderate and his risk of suicide to be reduced by his relative stability, the family support available to him, and his abstinence from illicit substances. Dr. Wooten identified a number of factors, including detention and return to Morocco, which were likely to render the risk of self-harm and suicide as high. D313 also explains that he has suffered from a severe learning disability since childhood. He was assessed by a learning psychologist, Dr. Tim Green, who prepared a report in 2020. Dr. Green noted in his report that D313's IQ falls well below the 5th percentile and that his intellectual functioning and memory was significantly impaired. D313 was deemed not to have litigation capacity during his successful appeal. Paragraphs 23 to 24, Chair, can be summarised as follows. D313 states that he was transferred to Brickhouse from Harmondsworth IRC on the 29th of May 2017. It was not his first time in Brickhouse. There was a plan to deport him to Morocco on the 30th of May 2017. He was held in Rule 40 isolation before the proposed flight. Picking up the witness statement at paragraph 25. It was really frightening to be held in isolation at this point. I felt like harming myself. I was getting removed to a country that I hadn't been to for so many years. I didn't know when my flight was, and I couldn't prepare for it. I was by myself, and I was just walking up and down. I had no one to talk to. I was very upset, and I was in tears. Paragraph 26, summarised as an application for judicial review stopped D313's deportation. Picking up the statement again, Chair, paragraph 28. My experiences of Brickhouse, IRC, are extremely negative. In particular, the conditions at Brickhouse were very similar to a prison, as we were locked in for much of the day and we were treated like prisoners. Summary of paragraphs 29 to 30. D313 explains that the mobile phones only worked outside at Brickhouse and only in some areas indoors. He states that the detainees were locked in at night between 9 p.m. and 8 a.m. and at lunchtime. Paragraph 31. The worst thing for me about being in a detention centre, including whilst at Brickhouse, is that I was so worried about getting deported all of the time. Paragraph 32. D313 states that he had his own cell at Brickhouse and he is aware that he had been assessed as not suitable for a shared cell. Paragraphs 35 and 36. At Brickhouse, I felt depressed and lonely, as I had no one to talk to during long periods locked into my cell. The cell was cold and I had nothing to do. I would often self-harm whilst I was alone at night. I felt that I had no hope and I thought about ending my life. I didn't report how I was feeling, as there was no one I trusted enough to open up to. I didn't want everyone to know how bad my mental health was. I was really worried that if I trusted one staff member and opened up to them, that they would tell someone else and everyone would find out. I was very scared that people would know how I was truly feeling. It was normal for detainees at Brickhouse to spend time with people from the same country, as it was difficult to survive in a place like that without any friends, and it was often easier to establish friendships with people who shared a language and aspects of culture. Paragraph 39 is summarised as, D313 talks about officers taking a lot of time to respond when other detainees push their cell bells. He states that he could hear noises of officers talking and moving around in a room nearby when this happened. He also describes difficulties in sleeping due to the noise at Brickhouse. Paragraphs 42 and 45 are summarised as D313 refers to his first night healthcare screening, which took place when he arrived at Brickhouse during the relevant period. He refers to the record of that screening at CJS 006629_001, suggests that he had not tried to harm himself in prison or out of prison, and that he did not have thoughts of deliberate self-harm. D313 states that he cannot recall whether he was asked questions about these matters, but explains the difficulties he would have had in talking about self-harm to a stranger who he had just met shortly after arriving at Brickhouse. D313 explains that he needs a lot of support to talk about his problems. However, there were numerous entries in D313's medical records which confirmed D313's history of self-harm and attempts at suicide. He notes that the entry relating to the first night screening states that health information had not been received from an outside source. He states that it seems his history was not considered. He also notes that the Home Office was aware of the contents of Dr. Wotton's report of the 25th of May 2017 by 30th of May 2017 at the latest, due to the available records. He also notes in relation to the first night screening that while the entry states that he had not received medication for mental health problems, he had been taking medication for his mental health whilst in prison, as confirmed by his medical records. Paragraphs 48 to 50. D313 believes he saw a nurse once or twice more during this period of detention at Brickhouse. He refers to an entry in his medical records at CJS 0006629_0003, where he was complaining about pain, which he thought was stress-related. He believes he was given some tablets by healthcare, but did not know exactly what they were, but thought they were for his mental health. D313 states that he did not attend some pre-booked appointments, either because he was unwell or didn't feel with it. Also, he didn't particularly trust anyone who was working at Brickhouse. He explains that he wanted to build a relationship before he would come to trust a medical professional, but this never happened at Brickhouse. He thought they were part of the system, and he was scared of asking for help. Paragraphs 53 and 54. D313 discusses having a reduction in dosage of medication to prepare him for being deported to Morocco. He describes it as inhumane and states it made him feel really unwell. D313 states that it made him want to hurt himself. He refers to previous examples of the negative impact of withdrawal on him during his detention, including sweating, chills, aches and pains. And picking up the witness statement, Chair, at paragraph 55. I didn't get clean or think about getting clean at Brickhouse because I was too worried about getting deported. My experience was that the people who worked at Brickhouse were extremely aggressive, and they seemed to enjoy punishing detainees. The officers maintained a culture of intimidation and fear within Brickhouse, which they used to control the detainees. I remember many of us were scared of the staff. I was worried that if I did anything that they thought was bad, I would be targeted by the officers. This was a very common topic of conversation amongst detainees. A lot of people said they were scared of what might happen to them. There was a horrible tension in the air. I know that a lot of individuals were assaulted by the officers because I either witnessed it or heard about it from other detainees. However, on many occasions, the detainees who'd been assaulted would be removed from the country and nobody would hear from them again. Individuals who didn't speak English had it particularly bad. The officers would therefore get away with it. This allowed the violence to continue. And paragraphs 60 to 67 are summarised as follows. D313, who is very slight, remembers when he was assaulted by DCO Sayers on 15th of June 2017. He states that he knew DCO Sayers as a big man who was very aggressive towards the detainees. He was aware of DCO Sayers' reputation even before the assault and found him extremely intimidating. D313 refers to an incident when DCO Sayers used force on a Romanian detainee who didn't speak English. D313 believed the man had mental health issues. He witnessed the detainee say something and DCO Sayers grab him, put him on the floor and put a knee on the man's back. The bell went and lots of officers arrived, put handcuffs on the detainee and took him away, screaming and crying. On the 15th of June 2017, D313 had suffered a spice attack and was at the time coming back down to normal. DCO Sayers took D313 back to his cell. D313 does not know what provoked the attack by DCO Sayers. He did not assault DCO Sayers. D313 states that he thinks DCO Sayers was just angry at something and did not like him and gave him a full punch to the face. Picking up the witness statement at paragraph 68. It was extremely painful and I was not completely over. Officer Sayers then picked me up by my face and threw me back on the bed. There was nothing that I could do to stop him hurting me. He was so much bigger and more powerful than me. I remember that when Officer Sayers assaulted me, there was at least one other officer with him. Nobody offered me any help and support afterwards. After he attacked me, I just sat there on the bed and cried. I wondered why he'd done this to me, but there didn't appear to be any explanation except for that he'd wanted to hurt me and felt able to abuse me in this way without any negative consequences. I remember self-harming and thinking about what had happened to me and how unfair it was. I was in a lot of pain afterwards in my cheek. It was red and bruised. My mental health suffered for some time afterwards. I still think about this incident. I remember that my family came to visit me when I still had marks from this assault. I didn't want to tell them what had happened. They were already suffering because I was in detention and I didn't want them to suffer more. And paragraphs 72 and 73 are summarised as follows. D313 now understands that DCO Sayers was investigated for this assault after footage from the BBC showed what he had done. It led to an investigation report which notes at HOM 001-585_0006 that DCO Sayers had claimed that he had accidentally used D313's face to get up off the bed. However, according to a witness, DCO Sayers had struck D313 with the back of his hand. It's also noted that a fellow officer had asked DCO Sayers whether he had a good team, which was taken to mean if he had officers who would cover up his actions. DCO Sayers replied, "No, that's why I did it on my own." D313 explains that the allegation was only partially substantiated, concluding at HOM 001-585_0009 that there was insufficient evidence to support the allegation of assault on D313, but that there was sufficient evidence to demonstrate that DCO Sayers employed an unapproved use of force and lied when he stated that he was alone during the incident. Picking up the witness statement, Chair, at paragraph 74. I think that DCO Sayers and the other officers attempted to cover up what happened to me. It's clear from the investigation report that the officers stuck together and tried to help each other out. They thought that they would get away with it because most detainees couldn't speak up or out for themselves. Paragraphs 75 and 77 are summarised as follows. D313 notes that it appears from the investigation report that the officers did not report the incident and that they also did not ask for him to get medical care, which shows that they did not want anyone to find out what had happened. D313 is really upset by the outcome. He's not sure why, when it had been found that DCO Sayers had lied about what happened, that anything he had to say about the incident was believed. D313 also does not know why anyone would believe that he tried to assault DCO Sayers, given how big he was compared to him. Back to the witness statement, Chair, at paragraph 78. I was not asked any questions by the investigators, and I was not given an opportunity to explain what had happened to me. I think that this is completely wrong. I was the victim, and they should have asked me what happened. Without asking me any questions, the investigation only had one side of the story, which wasn't true. I remember another incident at Brickhouse, which happened before I was granted bail. The officers told me that I was going to be moved to another detention centre, Morton Hall. My bail hearing was coming up soon, and I knew that I had an opportunity to be released. I also knew that my family was going to attend court to act as referees for me. I was desperate to have my bail hearing and to have a chance of being released from detention, so I said that I did not want to be transferred. The officers were very angry at me, and they handcuffed me and pulled my hands back. This was extremely painful. Paragraph 82 is summarised as D313 had his bail hearing the next day and was granted bail and released. Back to the witness statement at paragraph 83. Use of force and complaints. I was not aware of how to complain or what the processes were whilst at Brickhouse, and I did not make a complaint after I was assaulted by Officer Sayers or for the assault on me before I was granted bail. I have a serious learning disability, so even if there were materials available telling me how to complain, I wouldn't have been able to read them. There was no one there who I felt that I was able to confide in and who may have been able to help me with any complaints. In any event, I was too frightened to say anything anyway. I knew exactly what could happen when you got on the wrong side of one of the officers, and I was too scared. I retreated into myself after I was assaulted, and I did not want to raise too much of a fuss. I would have been too scared to speak out. I also did not think I would be taken seriously if I complained. The investigation into the assault on me by Officer Sayers on the 15th of June 2017, which failed to get an account from me, only confirms my feelings about the complaints process. Paragraphs 89 to 90 are summarised as D313 did not have a Rule 35 assessment at Brickhouse. He did not understand what one was, and nobody explained or provided any support. Paragraphs 91 and 92 are summarised. D313 does not believe he was on ACDT whilst at Brickhouse, although he did feel suicidal and hurt himself. He notes that he had regularly been placed on ACDT whilst in prison. D313 used spice whilst at Brickhouse, but not very often. He knew it was bad for him and saw how it affected others, but was suggestible in relation to drugs at that time. He describes spice use as absolutely widespread and states it was really easy to get hold of. Everyone had it. He is sure that officers must have been aware of how spice was getting in or been involved, as it was obvious someone was helping to get it in. D313 was not aware of spice coming in through visits. He states that detainees could get hold of anything at Brickhouse, including any drugs, cigarettes and mobile phones. And finally, Chair, back to the witness statement at paragraph 98, under the heading Impact. I still have bad memories about what happened to me in Brickhouse. I still think about the bad things that have happened in the past, including my experiences in Brickhouse. This makes me struggle to sleep at night. I remember the violence in the detention centre between officers and other detainees and when I was assaulted. Everything that I've been through makes it difficult to recover fully. I spend most of my time indoors and I find it difficult to go out. Whilst I've been granted leave to remain now, I've not escaped my past experiences in immigration detention. That witness statement is signed, Chair, and has the usual statement of truth at the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lee. And thank you too to D313 for taking the time to attend today. It's very much appreciated. I suggest that we now take our 15-minute break. We're going to be hearing from a live witness following that break, so that should give us time to organise that. So we'll reconvene at 11:45. Thank you.
All rise.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Ullman.
Chair, the next witness is Mr. Donnelly, Christopher Donnelly.
Thank you.
If you could repeat after me, please. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Let us have your full name, please.
Christopher Martin Donnelly.
And Mr. Donnelly, you will confirm that you have provided 2 witness statements to the inquiry, is that right?
That's correct.
The first of them dated the 17th of February of this year, which is SER 000444, and the second of which I think is dated, curiously, the 16th of February, but that is SER 000442. And Chair, I invite you to adduce those 2 statements, please, in full.
Indeed, thank you.
So, Mr. Donnelly, first of all, I want you to tell us something about yourself. Clearly you worked at G4S, becoming a detainee custody manager, or a DCM. When did you become a DCM at Brickhouse?
I joined the company in 2008, and I applied before the centre opened to become a detainee custody manager. So when the centre opened, I was a manager.
And the centre opened in March 2009, didn't it?
That's right.
So when you joined the company, when? In 2008?
December 2008.
December.
Yes.
So a few months before Brookhouse opened.
Yes.
And you left, just so we can get an idea of the period of time when you were a DCM at Brookhouse. When did you leave?
I am still.
You're still there with
at
Serco?
Brickhouse, yes.
All right. So when the company lost its contract, you carried on when Serco took over?
That's correct.
And are you still a DCM at Brookhouse?
Yes.
Prior to you gaining that appointment in 2008 and when the centre opened in March 2009, what previous experience did you have?
I worked for Safeway, later Morrison's, for 20 years as a deputy store manager.
And how did that equip you for work at Brookhouse?
It taught me to manage teams of people and also dealing with the public, which I had to do quite a lot in my role. So yes, it was fairly good preparation.
Fairly good, but was it, in your view, adequate preparation for the kind of people, if you like, the customers who you were dealing with at Brookhouse?
Probably not. It was a bit of a shock.
Yeah. Shock in the sense that dealing with customers in a Safeway supermarket is not going to confront you with the kind of issues, of which there were many, that confronted you at Brookhouse, presumably.
That's fair to say. And
Almost the same would be true of any other custody officer, whether a DCM or a DCO, at Brookhouse during that period.
I would say so.
You say it was, I think, a bit of a shock.
Yes.
In what way?
Just when the centre first opened, a huge percentage of the detainees were ex-prisoners.
DPs, detained persons.
Detained persons, sorry.
Yeah.
Where it's ex-HMP, and just the sort of the level of verbal abuse that we used to receive was quite a shock.
Yeah. So, and we'll come to what you have to say about it in a few moments. But it was, as you've just described it, it was the treatment that the detained persons were meting out towards the officers.
Yes.
Not the other way round.
No, not the other way around.
And amongst the population of Brickhouse were also time-served foreign national offenders.
Yes.
And what impact did they have on the life and running of the centre?
When we first opened, the detained people were much more familiar with the sort of regime of a prison or detention centre than we were initially. So we did find it quite difficult to find the right level of care.
By which you mean?
Just that they were more familiar with the environment than we were.
Yeah. So that they had experience through
Yes.
having served time in prison, however long that time had been. Whereas Christopher Donnelly, in your case, was effectively fresh-faced from Safeway or Morrison's, whatever it was, as a manager in a supermarket, and there you were confronted by a completely different ballgame, really.
Yes.
You say in your first witness statement, we don't have to put it up, but for reference, it's at paragraph 6. You say, in retrospect, I don't believe the recruitment process prepared any of us for the reality of life in an IRC.
Yeah.
What was it about the recruitment process that you think didn't prepare you?
It didn't make clear the sort of environment that we would be going into. There was nothing specifically about we're going to be dealing with so many foreign national prisoners, ex-foreign national prisoners. There was nothing like that in the recruitment.
And when you talk about the recruitment process, what part of the process do you have in mind? What do you mean by recruitment?
The initial job advertisement, I think, which was in, can't remember which paper, but it was in the paper.
And that's what you reacted to take the job?
Yes.
I suppose you're not going to expect G4S or any other company to advertise working at Brickhouse as this is a rotten place to come. The detainees are awful. And it's going to be a terrible shop because they're going to be abusive to you. So presumably it was just a fairly mundane advertisement inviting people to apply for what, jobs as DCOs and DCMs?
I think it was just DCOs.
Yeah. Did you start life there as a DCO then and get promoted?
I applied and got the DCO position, and in between then and the centre opening, the advertisement for DCMs came up, and I applied.
So, so that we understand it, did you go straight in as a DCM?
Yes.
And what was the fundamental difference between working there as a DCO and as a DCM? What was it that gave you managerial status rather than officer status?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, what was it that distinguished you to take the more senior position rather than the more junior position when you hadn't, as it were, done the hard yards as a DCO?
I can only imagine that it was my experience as a manager of teams and of people.
Managing people.
Yeah.
All right. You say in your paragraph 6, have you got your statements in front of you?
Yes.
So by all means, you can refer to them. As I say, I'm not going to put this up on screen, but it's your first witness statement, the one ending, for our purposes, 444. And it's your paragraph 6 on page 2. And Chair, you should have this behind your first flag.
Thank you.
You say at the end of that paragraph, paragraph 6, to be fair to G4S, do you have this? Mm-hmm. The existing IRCs, Immigration Removal Centres, Tinsley House and Oakington, which the company managed, were a far smaller, calmer and less challenging centre than Brickhouse turned out to be. Had you ever worked at them?
No. But
Did you ever work at them?
No.
How do you know that?
Through the passage of time, obviously, Tinsley was opened before Brickhouse, and I went to Tinsley subsequently, and we found out from detained people and staff transferring down to Brickhouse what sort of centre it was. So it was over a period of time that I found out that Tinsley was much calmer and Oakington similarly.
Right. Calmer in what sense? What does that mean, calmer?
Less incidences of violence, abuse,
Yeah.
much less recourse to use of force. I think the profile of a detained person was different in these centres.
By which you mean?
Like Tinsley, for example, I don't think any sex offenders can go to Tinsley House because they sometimes have families, for example.
And what about Oakington? I mean, these were just presumably rumours you were picking up from others who had experience of these places.
One of our managers, Jules.
Jules Williams.
Yes, came from Oakington, and he told us quite a bit about what life was like at Oakington.
Where is Oakington? Was it Oakington?
I think it's up near in Cambridgeshire.
Cambridgeshire. And while we have Jules Williams in mind, he was the residential manager?
That's right.
Were you close to him?
Not really, no.
Were others close to him?
He had his own set of DCMs which he managed.
Managed in a professional way, or they were his close chums?
From what I saw, professional.
Yeah. I mean, were there any cliques?
There were
Brickhouse?
groups of friends, but I wouldn't say cliques, no.
Well, it may be a use of language, Mr. Donnelly, but let's think about Jules Williams for the moment. Did he have people who were part of a group who were particularly close to him, like Nathan Ring, perhaps, and one or two others?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Carry on.
Sorry, I wasn't aware of any specific friendship between them.
So whether we call it friendships, groups, or cliques, so that we understand it, in all the time that you were there, up to and including the end of August of 2017, and you were there from March 2009, you were completely unaware, so that we understand your evidence, completely unaware of any groups, cliques, personal relationships which impacted on the professionalism of the individuals who worked there.
I would say so, yes.
So totally unaware, hadn't heard about it, hadn't seen it for yourself or anything like that?
Not that impacted any the performance of the managers in question, no.
Can we just have a look at what you say about culture at Brickhouse? And if you have your statement open, you'll find it at paragraph 7. That's your first statement. As far as culture at Brickhouse is concerned, I would characterise it as cooperative. You still agree with that word, cooperative?
Yes.
Working together as a team in the face of sometimes horrendous abuse and violence from some detainees. And so that we're clear about what you're saying here, the abuse and the violence is from whom to whom?
From detained persons towards staff.
Right. When you use the word violence, what do you mean by violence?
Assaults, spitting, kicking, punching.
Okay. The ethos, you continue, was to try our best to care for detainees and also to support co-workers and try to be professional at all times. The staff and managers were all ordinary, decent people in a very challenging situation. Have you changed your mind about that, Mr. Donnelly?
No.
I take it you've seen Panorama,
Yes.
and nothing you saw there makes you change your mind about what you say here.
The vast majority, I still believe, are decent, ordinary people.
Obviously, you don't use the word vast majority in this sentence, but is that, having seen Panorama, what you now think?
Some of them were shown to be not
Yeah.
very decent.
And who do you have in mind?
Jan, John Connolly,
Is it Pascali or Pashali?
Pishali, I think.
So Jan, John Connolly, who else?
Nathan Ring.
Yeah.
Some of the others, I can't quite remember their names.
Yeah. You say within my own work group, Oscar One and DCMs, we would all endeavour to work cooperatively and help each other in difficult situations and share workloads. This was a particular source of pride and pleasure for me in one of the best aspects of the job. The majority of detainees were also a pleasure to work with and had positive and cordial working relationships with them, assisting many of them, particularly those in distress, through ACDT case reviews. This cooperative team working ethos, from my perspective, has been a constant throughout my time in Brickhouse. And so, subject to the few qualifications which I've asked you about, to what you say here at paragraph 7, do you stand by every word of this, even today?
Yes.
Let me ask you, please, about the values as well as aspects of culture that you mention in this statement, paragraph 10. All of your statement will be published, subject to redactions in due course, Mr. Donnelly. So if I skate over everything that, or anything, that means it's not going to be missed. But obviously in the time we have, I can only take you to parts of it. But let me ask you about paragraph 10. The values and culture of G4S at Brickhouse were on the whole professional and caring. Officers, DCM, senior management were genuinely interested in the welfare of detainees and staff. Protection of vulnerable detainees was and is taken very seriously by everyone who works at Brickhouse. The culture and values of G4S were perfectly appropriate to the care of all detainees, and in my opinion, the care for the vulnerable through the management of ACDTs, raised concern, documents, the violence reduction programme, etc., were of a high standard, and I believe this has been borne out during HMIP inspections. I personally conducted numerous ACDT case reviews daily with vulnerable detainees and had a very positive and collaborative relationship with all the RMNs, those are the mental health nurses, and healthcare staff, and I can state very strongly that the level of care for detainees was of a high standard. Attitudes towards detainees, for my own part and from what I saw and heard from other officers, were overwhelmingly positive and professional. As I've stated before, the vast majority of detainees were polite, well-behaved, and staff had no issues working with them. The minority of detainees who were rude and or violent to others, staff and detainees, were more challenging. But I've always been surprised and impressed by the resilience and professionalism of the officers at Brickhouse. And paragraph 11, just the first line, I believe the culture and values were to provide a genuinely good environment for detainees and staff. If that was all we had, Mr. Donnelly, it painted a rather positive picture of Brickhouse during the time you were there. Yep, Panorama shows a different side to it. Do you agree?
Yes, it does.
And what the inquiry might struggle to understand is why, Mr. Donnelly, the picture you paint in this statement is so out of kilter to what we saw on Panorama. Can you explain it?
What I have said is how I genuinely feel about Brickhouse and the environment that we worked in. What was shown on Panorama is not something that I'd witnessed in my time at Brickhouse.
And I assume, and maybe wrongly, but you tell us, that you worked in all parts of Brickhouse during the time you were there.
Yes.
And I'm talking about, forget the Serco years, I'm talking about the G4S years.
Mm-hmm.
So we can assume, can we, from your evidence, you worked on A wing,
Yeah.
B wing,
Yeah.
C,
Yeah.
D, E, care and separation,
Yeah.
reception,
No.
never reception, activities,
No.
any other parts of Brickhouse
Visits.
visits?
Yeah.
Yeah. Admin?
No.
Right. And you were never part of the SMT?
No.
No. So, well, we can assume in all of those years, Mr. Donnelly, that you had walked the corridors, unlocked the rooms, done the roll counts, the food, refusal lists. You had worked night shifts, day shifts, weekends. You'd done it all.
Yes.
And so that we understand your position, not once. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I want to understand your position. Not once had you seen anything of the kind that Callum Tully was able to covertly record.
That's right.
Not once.
Not once.
Ever.
No.
Not in terms of physical abuse,
No.
not in terms of verbal abuse.
No.
Nothing. No racism, no homophobic or misogynistic language. No?
No.
Nothing.
No.
And you deal with, before I move on, you deal with, just for completeness, you were asked about staff morale, and you deal with that at your paragraph 8 in your first witness statement. You say, I believe that staff morale was what it usually was at Brickhouse. Most just getting on with the job, others genuinely not happy. Staff morale is something that is always fluctuating, with the most dissatisfied people usually being the most vocal. Who do you remember now as being the most dissatisfied people among your colleagues?
Nobody in particular springs to mind, just as a general principle. The ones who are unhappy usually are more vocal.
Were you unhappy?
No.
Never?
Challenged, but I wouldn't say unhappy.
What about understaffing? Was that anything that ever affected your morale?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll come to that in a second, and we'll see what you have to say about it. One of the other things that you say, and if you turn the page to page 4, paragraph 14, you talk about your duties as a DCM. You say, as part of my DCM duties, I deal with formal detainee complaints, and I've dealt with dozens over the years. These complaints have included allegations of victimisation or unfair treatment by staff. I can't recall the exact details, but after rigorous documented investigations, I didn't uphold a single complaint. Every one of them, without exception, was entirely without merit. Other complaints regarding missing property, for example, I have upheld and recommended reimbursement, but nothing regarding victimisation. Anything you want to change about that?
No.
Now, you were asked, for the purposes of your first witness statement, to consider the layout of Brickhouse. There's one thing I'd like to ask you, please, which is about the addition of a third bunk, and you deal with this at your paragraph 18 of your first statement. We have been told that in May 2017, a third bunk was added to a number of the rooms. Do you remember which rooms they were? Which wing? Or
I
wings?
think it was A, C, and D wings.
Yeah.
The ground floor rooms, I think there was another 60 bunks put in.
Yeah, 60. And so that we understand, we've seen a few video clips of some of the rooms, but so that we understand it, whereas a room would have ordinarily a bed either side with the window and a sort of joined desk type contraption under the window, and you'd have the loo on one side. Where the third bed was added was as a bunk, is that correct?
That's right.
And was that on the toilet side, or was it opposite, diagonally opposite the toilet side?
It was on the same side as the toilet, so the bunk would attach to the
Yeah.
surrounding toilet wall.
And you say a stable type door was fitted to the toilet. Was that at the same time as those bunks were fitted?
Yes.
And when you say a stable door, was that a fixed type of door? Did it allow any privacy?
I believe it had some space at the bottom and space at the top, but more privacy than the curtain that we used to use.
Yeah. And you say this increased our capacity by, as you've already indicated, 60 beds, but was hardly ever used. Why?
We didn't think it was safe.
We? Who's we?
The staff,
By which you mean
myself and other staff.
what? Well, at what level? Your level, senior management, the company?
Certainly at my level and DCO's.
Where did the order come from for these beds to be fitted? Was it a company directive, or did it come from the Home Office?
I believe it was the Home Office.
Yeah. To increase capacity?
Yes.
Yeah. And tell us, what was it you felt was, why was it a bad idea?
I had concerns that 3 people in one room would be unpleasant for those involved.
Yeah.
The top bunk, I thought it would be unsafe getting up and getting down from it, especially at night.
Did it have a ladder or a ladder fixed to it?
Yes.
And how much, for those who haven't been there, how much headspace would it have afforded to the person in the top bunk?
Possibly 3 feet, something of that order.
Okay. Hardly ever used suggests it was used, or they were used.
From memory, some groups of detained persons were very eager to share three to a room, principally Chinese and Vietnamese.
Because?
Because they just like that. Everybody else wasn't keen.
Yeah. So how long did this experiment last?
Several months.
Yeah. And was it eventually abandoned?
Yes.
Do you remember when?
And not exactly, no.
Several months.
I think of that sort of time, yeah.
And you say staff, and looking at your statement again, staff had major concerns about 3 detainees in such a confined space, health and safety concerns about accessing the top bunk via a very small thin ladder, risk of serious injury if a detainee had to be moved from the top bunk using force. And you say in the end the third bunk was never used, and the idea was eventually abandoned and the extra bunk removed, quite rightly in my opinion. So let's say, should we absolutely understand what you're telling us? Hardly ever used or never used?
Hardly ever used.
Right. Now, I asked you a little earlier about understaffing. Can we go to paragraph 40 of your first statement, please? And when I say 40, we have to go to page 10 because I think the numbering went out, and that's not your fault. It was because of the way you were asked the questions. But it's 40 with a closing bracket on page 10 of your first statement. You say the staffing levels always met the minimum contract standard. Now, just tell us what you mean by that.
2 officers to a wing, and the activity functions open and available for detained persons.
And you continue by saying sometimes we struggle to provide emergency escorts, bed watches. What do you mean by a bed watch?
Where a detained person is admitted to hospital, and we have to,
Or travel with them?
yes, and stay with them.
Okay. But as Oscar 1, I would say that we met the contract during this period. Oscar 1, just remind us what that means, please.
Oscar 1's the duty operations manager.
Yeah.
So it's my sort of job to oversee the delivery of the contract.
And was that your job every day of every week, or was it just you were sometimes Oscar 1?
Mostly Oscar 1, not all the times. Occasionally there would be 2 of us in, one of us would take the Oscar 1
Yeah.
role, somebody would do another role.
So your job was to ensure that the contract was met during the period.
Yes.
And what did that mean to you as Oscar 1? How were the terms of the contract to be met when you were on duty? What was it you were looking out for? What was it your job to do?
Principally that all the activity departments were open, library, IT, that sort of thing, that the visits function was operating normally, that reception had enough staff to process arrivals within the time period.
Yeah. What was the consequence, from your perspective, of the contract not being met?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, weren't there penalties
There were
that the Home
financial
Office
penalties.
could
Yes.
impose on the company?
Yes.
And you must have known about that.
Yes.
You sound unsure.
It wasn't referred to very often, but yes, reference was made if the Home Office fined the company.
Yeah. And when you say reference by whom to whom?
From senior management to us.
Right. And what did reference really look like? What did it mean? You know, Chris, you've cost the company a fortune because you took your eyes off the ball. Is that what reference looked like, or was reference and I sit down and say company can't afford to be fined by the Home Office for this, that, or the other? What did it look like?
It was a sit-down sort of lessons learned. We've just picked up this fine. How did it happen? What are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah. And to the extent that picking up penalties from the Home Office for non-compliance with aspects of the contract impacted on you, how did that impact on detainees?
They didn't get the service that they were entitled to, basically.
Well, what service was that?
Whether it was not having enough staff, so the IT wasn't open, or the cultural kitchen, or some aspect of provision of service didn't happen, then
So
it'd
the
be
current,
detrimental to their experience at Brickhouse.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty dismal anyway, wasn't it?
It was to begin with, but we did make efforts, concerted efforts, to make the place more softer environment, and less daunting.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't know better, you'd think it was a prison, just looking at the place.
Yes.
Yeah. It was modelled, as you must know, on a Category B prison.
That's right.
Yeah. And it looked like one and almost certainly felt like one.
I imagine it did.
Yeah. Imagine?
Well, I haven't been a detained person.
No, but
yes.
you were an officer
yes,
in
it was.
one.
Yeah, it was very prison-like.
Yeah. You say it, going to the next page, to my recollection, this is paragraph 44. Although staffing levels were tight, we offered by and large the contracted level of activities and services under the contract. This was monitored constantly by the Home Office, and I don't remember any significant discussion regarding any shortfall. You talked a little earlier about staff being dissatisfied and staff morale. Understaffing was one of the key frustrations, wasn't it? Can somebody put some money in the meter, please?
It's not moving about enough.
Thank you. Maybe I'm not moving around enough. That understaffing was one of the issues. And one of the frustrations, presumably, for other officers. Is that right? We've heard it from others, whether in their evidence, and I'm sure we're going to hear it again. But you don't remember any significant discussion around it?
Certainly not regarding not providing the activities under the contract. Sometimes, if we had sick, then yeah, things were quite tight.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard, and we'll hear again, I'm sure, about roll counts, lock-ins, covering the wings, too few DCOs on the wing at any given time, all of those sorts of problems. And you must have been aware of that kind of issue during your time there.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a constant, or do you think it was just the odd rare exception?
I don't think it's constant. I think it was by exception.
Yeah. What was the problem of understaffing from your perspective? What was it? Why couldn't the company recruit, or why didn't they have sufficient staff to do the job that they were contracted to do?
I think that the environment came as quite a major shock to a lot of the new starters, and that retention was a problem for the company. I think as well that the DCOs were working a 46-hour week, and it just wasn't a very attractive proposition for a lot of people.
So what, they came and they went?
Yes.
And getting in new staff was what, problematic? Or did they just recruit more and they came and went as well?
That, yeah.
And only the diehards remained behind?
Yeah.
You say at your paragraph 45 on page 11, I believe that the impact of perceived staff shortages had a negative effect on morale for some but not all staff. You say, I've worked at Brickhouse since it opened and do not consider that particular period as drastically worse than any other period. I don't believe staff safety was compromised. Thinking about life now under Serco, Mr. Nolly, why I have it in mind, things improved? I mean, if you want to compare your experience now with that during the G4S years, is it favourable? I mean, I know I'm putting you in a difficult position because you're almost certainly a company man, but is it more favourable now?
I would say it is. The staffing profile is hugely increased from what it was at G4S. I think the company undertook to hire an extra 180 staff from...
We're talking about Serco.
Serco, yeah, from what the G4S profile was, but it was a different different contract.
Yeah,
But
it's
yes,
a
I would
new
say,
contract.
so I would say things have improved, yes.
Yeah. I mean, from your perspective, did it suit G4S to keep staff numbers low? Save the expenses bill a bit, didn't it? Would have helped their profits.
I don't believe that to be the case. I think constant recruitment is very, very expensive. So I don't think there was any financial benefit to keeping numbers down
Yeah.
at all.
Or certainly nothing you ever heard along those lines?
No.
I don't know if you watched his evidence or have read any of the transcripts that are online, but Callum Tully, who gave evidence to us back in late November and early December, said, in particular on the 29th of November, that it was a poorly staffed detention centre. And to use his term, staffing was abysmal. Do you agree with that or disagree?
Disagree.
In what way?
I wouldn't say it was abysmal. Certainly not abysmal.
How do you describe it then?
Adequate. Just.
Yeah. Now, a little earlier I was asking you about values and culture. And you remember telling us, by reference to paragraph 10 on page 3, that the minority of detainees who were rude and or violent to others were more challenging.
Yes.
So that we understand the picture from your experience, it was only a minority of detainees who were rude.
Yes.
Yeah? And on page 12, you say, to my recollection, forgive me, paragraph 12 on page 4, to my recollection, I can't recall a situation regarding mistreatment of individuals or groups or allegations thereof. So you remember I was asking you about that a little earlier. And then if we go, please, on to page 15, just to pick up the same theme, paragraph 77 on page 15, I didn't witness any verbal or physical abuse of detainees by officers at Brickhouse. Verbal and physical abuse of officers, myself included, by detainees was a regular, if not daily, occurrence. And paragraph 78, no, I did not. And the no, I did not is a reference to the question whether you witnessed any abuse going the other way. In my experience, you say abuse was a one-way street. Detainees, a small minority, abusing staff and others. And so, something you've already told us, but I want to be absolutely clear, from the perspective of Chris Donnelly, you mean what you say here, it was all a one-way street, despite what we see in Panorama?
Yes.
Let me ask you about Panorama, please, because if you go to your page 16, I want to understand your takeout from having viewed it. And did you view it on the evening it went out? Which was, if my memory serves me, Monday the 4th of September 2017.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Have you reviewed it?
I have.
How often?
Once.
So you've seen it twice, live and a recording. And you were asked the question, and your response is to be found at 85, of what your view was about it. Devastatingly negative, I suppose you could say that. You were outraged. yeah?
I was, and I think most of the, if not all of the staff at Brickhouse were.
Outraged by what?
Just how unfair they thought it was,
Yeah, because it was all one way.
basically.
Unfair, biased.
Yes.
You say people felt betrayed, cheated and lied to. By whom? By
Callum
what?
Tully.
Did you know Callum Tully?
I worked with Callum Tully since all the time he was there.
Overwhelmingly, you say every staff member said it was an outrageous travesty, unfair, biased and deceitful. They didn't recognise it as the place where they worked, and presumably that final sentence applies to you as well.
Yeah.
So for you, completely unrecognisable.
Yes.
Yeah. You accept that Callum Tully didn't make it all up,
I do accept that.
and you accept that these things happened, and for the reasons he has given us, he worked as an undercover operative for the BBC and recorded these things. And so they played out in front of a camera, and he was simply the vehicle by which that happened. So can you explain, Mr. Donnelly, the rather pleasant picture you've painted for us of the Brickhouse you knew with the panorama one that he recorded for us, which you say you didn't? Can you explain how all of that you failed to observe?
All I can tell you is that I didn't see anything like that Callum Tully
No.
recorded.
Either he was very lucky in that during the period that he recorded these things, between the 24th of April and around the early middle July, and he was able to capture a number of incidents, not just physical, but verbal, or they'd been going on all along. Do you agree with that? I mean, these things just don't happen by coincidence, do they?
No. Like I said, I do not recall seeing anything like that he recorded in front of me. Never seen that.
No. So he was just lucky.
I don't know.
And now, who were the other staff who were as outraged as you were by this travesty of a BBC broadcast? Who were the others?
Virtually everyone.
Well, that doesn't help us.
Right.
Did you speak to them afterwards?
Yeah, it was a topic of conversation the next day, certainly.
What, on phones or messaging?
No, actually at work.
At work. So you'll go back to work and say, this is all a terrible travesty. Brickhouse is a wonderful place to work. And look what the BBC has done. Who in particular were the most vocal with their outrage?
I don't understand what you mean.
Who were the most vocal with their outrage? Who made the most noise about how outrageous the BBC programme was? Who were the ones who were saying, that's not the Brickhouse we know?
Generally, everyone. Nobody in particular sticks out.
Well, who did you speak to?
Well, I go around the building, so I speak to virtually everyone.
All right, well, did you speak to Jan Pashali?
Not that I recall, no.
No, so we don't know what he told you. Did you speak to Nathan Ring?
No.
Did you speak to John Connolly?
No.
Derek Murphy?
Not that I recall, no.
Dan Small?
No.
Dan Lake? No?
No.
And any number of others. So who in your mind sticks out as somebody who you did speak to, who was as outraged about it as you were?
I can't give you a specific name. I don't think any of the guys that you mentioned were still there after the programme.
Some true, some had left.
Yeah. But it was just a general consensus amongst the staff that they didn't recognise it as the place where they worked.
Were you in touch with any of the people who had left?
No.
I think Pashali had left by then.
No.
You're right about that.
No.
No. All right. You were asked, and if you look on page 16 and onwards, for your views about individuals. And I'm not going to go through them all because they're there set out in your statements. But can I just pick you up on a few of them? You deal with Derek Murphy at 89E, letter E. Derek Murphy, I worked with Derek. He was one of the DCMs I worked with. In actual fact, you may remember, Mr. Donnelly, he wasn't a DCM until he was acting up at the end of July. So in the period we're talking about, to the end of August, he was only a DCM for a month. For the rest, he was a DCO. But be that as it may, you worked with him. You had no concerns, you say, about his professionalism. Is that right?
Yeah.
Never saw him verbally abusing anyone?
No.
Never saw him physically attack anyone?
No.
Or use unnecessary or excessive force in any use of force incident?
No.
This is Derek Murphy we're talking about. Big guy,
Yes.
beard.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can't recall any instances of verbal abuse by him?
No.
And you worked with him, presumably,
Yes.
pretty often, one imagines?
Yeah.
On use of force incidents
Sometimes, yeah.
and around the wings?
Yeah.
Yeah. And on E-wing?
Yes.
You say John Connolly. I very seldom worked with John as he was based mostly at Tinsley House. I never had any concerns about John's professionalism, never witnessed any verbal abuse or any physical abuse by him. John Connolly was a CNR, or use of force trainer. You clearly must have done control and restraint
Yeah.
training when you began, and you must have done several refresher courses.
Mm-hmm.
Did he ever train you?
I believe I have been trained by John, yeah.
And how did you find his training and his instruction?
Fine.
Yeah.
Good.
Professional?
Yes.
Do you remember on Panorama, that part of Panorama where he is in a stairwell while one of the detainees, D275, on the 17th of May is on the netting? And they're all waiting there, some of them in riot gear, and they're waiting for the nationals to turn up. You remember that?
Yes.
And one of the things he advises Callum Tully to do is to say to the guy, "Listen here, nigger." Did that surprise you?
It did.
You never heard that word or anything like it out of his mouth before?
Never.
So it so happens Callum Tully captures it for the camera on the 17th of May, but you'd never heard it in all the time that you had been there. And am I right in thinking Connolly had been there almost as long as you had? Although he'd worked at Tinsley House, but you'd known him, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah. Or anything misogynistic from him, or homophobic, or nothing like that from John?
No.
Straight guy. Never said anything untoward.
No.
And then on the next page, Jan Pashali, you deal with the letter P. I worked with Jan quite a lot as he was an E-wing officer. What do you mean by an E-wing officer?
That was his usual area of work, E-wing.
He was an experienced ex-HMP, Her Majesty's Prisons officer. I'm pausing there. How did you know that he was a former prison officer?
I'm sure he mentioned it.
Yeah. And did he, you ever pick up any stories from him about what he would do or what he got up to when he was working in the prison service?
Not that I recall, no.
How he would assault people?
No.
No?
No.
And you continue, I always thought he was very capable and knowledgeable. In what way was he capable and knowledgeable?
He knew a lot about regimes, how
About, forgive me?
regimes and how places like Brickhouse or an HMP worked. And in my experience, the way he dealt with detained persons was, well, I thought he was good with them.
Yeah. How did his experience in the prison service equip him, do you think, for work in a detention centre?
I guess he wasn't easily shocked.
No? What about in terms of control and restraint? Do you think that impacted on the way he went about his business?
I think he was experienced.
Yeah, and how did he show his experience in the physical use of force?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, you say he was experienced. What I want to understand is how he demonstrated that level of experience. How did he bring his experience from the prison service into the detention centre? What was it he was equipped to do that others who had not had his experience were not equipped to do? What did he bring to the party, if you like?
Right. I can only say that when he did control and restraint, his experience, I don't know what else to say, really.
Yeah. Well, was he better than others at doing it?
He was competent.
Yeah. Physical man.
He was a big lad, yeah.
Yeah. Did he do boxing or MMA or something like that?
I don't know.
You say, I found him to be helpful and professional when dealing with detainees, so you never had any doubts or concerns about his dealings, verbal or physical, with any of the detainees at Brickhouse?
No.
So not verbal, not physical, again, nothing you had ever witnessed Bashali doing?
No. I thought he was, like I said before, I always thought he was a good officer.
Say it again.
I thought he was a good officer.
Good officer. Let's go to the final page of your statement, paragraph 90, please. I've asked you one thing on this topic, but let's just, as it were, clear it out of the way for now. Many things were changed after the programme came out. Those things were changed again when Serco took over in May 2020. First of all, to your recollection, what changed after September 2017 while G4S was still in harness?
The main thing that I remember is that the DCO contract was brought down from 46 to 40 hours on the same money, and all the staff rosters were reviewed and changed with staff voting on them. And I think it was a very, very positive move.
And the point of bringing down the working week and the rosters, what impact was that designed to have?
To improve officers' work-life balance, I guess.
Make the job more attractive?
To make the job more attractive, to stop the turnover of staff, to improve retention.
Yeah. Did it have that impact?
I believe it did.
What else do you remember G4S changing? Apart from the sweep out of certain people,
Yeah.
resignations and dismissals, but apart from that, what else do you remember?
Not much, to be honest.
Yeah. That was September 2017. Serco, G4S retains a contract, or at least an interim contract, until Serco come in May 2020. So you're talking about at least 2.5 years of G4S continuing in Brickhouse. Serco, how did they change things after the initial changes by G4S? Apart from staffing, which you say is better, what else do you think is a marked improvement by Serco?
Staffing is the main one that springs to mind.
Yeah. Anything else?
Not that I can think.
Do we understand that there are the same sort of levels of dissatisfaction among certain staff in terms of morale?
No, that has improved.
That
I would
has
say, yeah,
improved, right?
yeah.
And the culture and values of Serco as against the culture and values of G4S, the same or different?
I mean, like I said in my statement, my understanding of the values of G4S were about decency and providing a good environment for detained people
Yeah.
and staff. And that's obviously the same for Serco.
Yeah. I mean, obviously times have changed. We've gone through a couple of years of a pandemic, which will have reduced numbers at Brickhouse.
Mm-hmm.
What's the capacity like now?
Very low, probably about a third of, we're around about 150 mark.
So we have to recall that since Serco have taken over, those have been the pandemic years.
Yes,
So Serco have had to deal with a very different set of circumstances, and one which is almost certainly more favourable to them than it was to G4S during the period that they were in charge.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. So what, to your knowledge, has been, I don't want a precise figure, but a ballpark, what has been the maximum capacity since May 2020, do you think, very roughly?
I think the most that we've had is probably what we've got now is around about 100, 150.
Yeah, which is at least a third of what Brickhouse was supposed to hold. I think before the third beds went in May 2017. And what about staff numbers? What's the ratio?
What, staff to residents?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Because you say it's better,
Yes,
but we have to be slightly careful because the demographics and the population is different.
that's true.
But looking at your general daily work, is your sense that even though the capacity of the detainee population is far less than it was during the period that this inquiry is examining, is nonetheless the staffing better pro rata than it was during that period?
Definitely.
Okay. And what about the detainee population? Do they appear to you to be better disposed than they were during the period we're looking at?
Again, it's all about proportion. We've still got some challenging guys in there, but overall, I would say the profile, I would say it's probably about the same.
Yeah. And anything else, Mr. Donnelly, that you can tell us about in terms of Serco that has improved, taking into account all of those factors and different circumstances? Anything else that you feel makes it a happier place? I mean, I accept you say it was a pretty happy place at the time under G4S, but has it improved markedly? Would those of us who might have seen it during the G4S years come back under Serco's charge and say, this is so different, it's just unbelievable? Or are we saying it's really very much the same place with a few tweaks here and there?
Like we discussed before, the staffing is hugely improved. A lot of the softening of the environment happened in the G4S years. But I would say staff morale has improved under Serco.
And what's your job there now?
I'm still...
Same position?
Yeah.
Doing the same work, operations?
Yes.
Oscar 1, or do they have the same terminology?
Yes, we do.
Right, okay. Good. All right, well, that's all I'm going to ask you for the most part on the generality, Chair, slightly early, but I'm going to move to specifics next, and so it may be slightly early, but not very much. A good time to rise and perhaps come back at 2 o'clock.
Indeed. Thank you very much. We'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
All rise.